Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jim Fricker. I'm the media director at Zen Peacemakers. It's really nice to see everyone familiar and a few people who may be new to Zen Peacemakers. This is our Peacemaker Circle format, and it's part of our weekly offering. Sometimes we do this twice a week, but I think last year we might have done over 100 of these events. They're all free, and we really appreciate you being here for this. It's a way for us to explore the Zen Peacemakers' three tenets of not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. And what we really do is explore maybe 10 different topics throughout these cycles of like mental, physical, spiritual health, gender equality, interfaith collaboration, social entrepreneurship, prison outreach, climate environment, etc. These areas that we tend to be most concerned about. Zen Peacemakers is an organization. It's an interfaith or non-faith organization. We've been around over 30 years. We have about over 6,000 members in 25 countries and currently over 60 affiliate groups throughout the world. And aside from our bearing witness retreats, like ones we do at Auschwitz, Alabama, and South Dakota with Lakota elders, these events online are free, and we really appreciate any support that you can give to us as far as able to become a member, either a free member or a supporting member. You can subscribe to our Peacemakers podcast, our weekly newsletter, make a small donation. All of these little donations really help us be able to put on these events. And I'll put some links into the chat as far as how you could do that. So thank you for being here for this. Today, we are really grateful to have Fleet Maull come join us. Fleet, you're a longtime friend and elder in the Zen Peacemaker community. You've helped us form to be what we are today. Fleet is a Zen priest, a Dharma teacher, pioneer in both prison reform and mindfulness-based social action. He is founder of the Prison Mindfulness Institute and Engaged Mindfulness Institute as well. And I guess you work at the intersection of social justice, trauma healing, and spiritual practice. This is powerful work. Trained closely with Bernie Glassman, our founder, and deeply involved for decades in our Auschwitz retreat, among others. And it's been a pleasure to get to know you over the past few years. And I think with that, I would like to hand it over to you, Fleet. Thank you for being here, and thank you, everyone. Fleet, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. Thank you for that kind introduction, and good to see you, and good to see everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So, I think today our topic has to do with prison outreach, with criminal justice and public safety outreach. My colleague, Vita Pires Crisp, who is our executive director at Prison Dharma Network, is, I believe, going to do one of these circles if she hasn't already and focus more on the in-prison work with the incarcerated. I'm going to focus more on the work we do with public safety professionals. So Prison Dharma Network is a nonprofit I started while I was in prison originally in 1989, and then we had to reincorporate it, so its official date is 1991 currently. And it has three divisions: Prison Mindfulness Institute, which brings mindfulness-based programming to at-risk incarcerated returning youth and adults. Then the Engaged Mindfulness Institute, which Jim mentioned, which provides training. We train mindfulness teachers in trauma-informed approaches to sharing the practice of mindfulness with individuals and populations, communities that have been placed at risk and marginalized and so forth, where there is a lot of trauma. And then our third division is called the Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. And through that division, we provide training for correctional officers, probation and parole officers, community police, sheriff's departments. We've worked with the U.S. Border Patrol. We've worked with many agencies over the years, and we have a flagship 10-week program we call the 10-week Mindfulness-Based Wellness and Resiliency program. And I'm going to show you a video about that in a moment. Um, and But we offer all kinds of other trainings as well. But it's all mindfulness-based training, mostly focused on the wellness and resiliency of the public safety professionals. We also do some leadership training and some motivational interviewing training, things like that. Um, Currently, this is really my most active involvement. Many you may know that during the pandemic years of the lockdown, the prisons were all really closed to outside volunteers and contractors, um, and just to keep those populations safe. And so the whole prison volunteerism thing kind of shut down for a while. And so I was going into prisons quite frequently before the pandemic and offering programs with prisoners, but haven't done that since then. Um, but I have continued to, I mean, we do as an organization, our volunteers do, and our executive director does. And I'll mention something about the programming we offer prisoners in just a moment. But what I've been involved with mostly is training public safety professionals. That continued throughout the pandemic because we shifted our programs online and we offered that 10-week program online, especially in the province of Ontario, Canada, where we've probably trained about 3,000 officers now. Um, and then as we came out of lockdowns, it became hybrid, which it is today. Um, and I don't know, I think next week I'm doing an online program for them. And this fall we have a full 10-week program that will have both online and live groups. And so we'll be going up to Canada to deliver parts of it live and parts of it will be online and so forth. Um, So I've remained active in that work, and I'm very often I'm involved in something with public safety professionals just about every week. Um, so um, so that's mostly what I'm going to talk about today, and I'll show the video in a moment and answer your questions. But just to reference the work with the incarcerated for a moment, so we have a program called the Path of Freedom program, which is a mindfulness-based emotional intelligence curriculum that we first developed in the early 2000s, and we piloted it at a maximum security juvenile facility in Colorado, and then we developed an adult version as well, and that really became our flagship prison program. And before the COVID-19 pandemic, it was in 21 states and 7 countries. And we had trained several thousand volunteers around the world to deliver that program. And so it is coming back online now. Um, and there are our volunteers and people we've trained are again going into prisons and jails around the country and in this country and other countries and delivering that program. In the meantime, though, an interesting development is that prisons started giving prisoners access to computer tablets, secure computer tablets. They're kind of they're a bit funky. They're not very high definition. They're kind of smaller than what you think of as an iPad, but they have access to them, and these are then operated through vendors like Securus and other vendors, and prisoners can then incarcerated folks can then FaceTime with their families. So obviously they love that. They get charged for that, which is how these outside vendors are making money. They're probably overcharging and exploiting. There'll probably be a lawsuit at some point, like there has been periodically with the phone companies. I don't know the details of that, but nonetheless, I'm sure most incarcerated folks are happy just to have the opportunity to FaceTime with their family. And then they can also purchase programming if they have money in their commissary account, paid programming like probably Netflix or things like that that are approved by the prison. Um, and then there's a lot of free programming. And so that comes to what we do. So we were contacted by another platform called Indovo many years ago, and they wanted to put our Path to Freedom program on their platform. So we created a special version for them, all video based, and they put it on their platform. And then we never heard from them for a while. And we thought it was just a good idea that never manifested. And then later they contacted us. They actually changed their name. I can't remember what their original name was, which is why we couldn't find them when we were searching. But they were definitely up and running with our program, and over 35,000 prisoners at that point had enrolled in it with very high completion rates. I mean, we were astounded because those are extraordinary numbers to be able to reach that many incarcerated citizens. And now over 150,000 incarcerated persons have enrolled in our programs online with really, really high completion rates. And we get a lot of data back and written data from the participants and so forth. So it's a very active program, and our program is the most popular free program on their platform. And they asked us to create more programs. So we've been busy creating more programs. Vita has created a program on conflict resolution, and we've created some relapse prevention programs and things like that. So we're very active now in getting these sort of video online. Well, it's not really online. It's on these tablets. I guess it's online. They're accessing it through the web out to these to make it accessible, and over 1 million incarcerated persons in this country have access to those tablets. So the reach we're able to have is extraordinary compared to what we could have ever done with volunteers. Now, we're still very much promoting in-person programming, and I think the ideal situation is where you'd have a correctional facility, you'd have someone coming in delivering our Path to Freedom program online, and then the participants would also have access to it in their on their tablet. And then we also do the program by correspondence. We have correspondent relationships with lots of prisoners, and we send them all the Path to Freedom materials, and then as they go through it, they correspond with us about it. So anyway, all of that work is really alive and well and flourishing. We also have a huge book ministry that we send out to prisoners. But anyway, I won't say more about that. I don't want to steal Vita's thunder when she presents, unless she has already. But so let's watch this film now, because I think giving you a visual of it will be the best way to get our dialogue going about this work. So let's see. Let me share screen here. And, let me go back. I'm going to stop sharing here. Hang on a minute. I got to make sure I optimized for sound. Yep. Okay. And hopefully this will come through all right. I'm going to lower the volume just a little. And
I had an inmate that had a mental episode. He became violent with another officer. I just took that second pause, just kind of thought, okay, I know that I can take care of him physically, but how am I going to deal with him and de-escalate him? Using a very calm voice, which that was kind of out of the norm for me. I just calmly talked to him, hey, you need to calm down, you need to relax. I'm not gonna hurt you, I'm here to help you. And it was just my tone of voice and how I reacted with him that eventually brought him down to a level that he was manageable. And I had other staff tell me, hey, that's not like you. What's different?
working in a correctional environment, there's obviously fear, there's danger, and so our tendency is we're set up neurobiologically to go into a fear-based response. It's okay to go that way in a crisis, but you need to be able to come back down. Simple mind-body awareness tools can help us learn to regulate our own autonomic nervous system. In through the nose, out through pursed lips.
It is a work site where you walk in and you immediately have to be alert and on guard. Most folks think about the physical danger of assault, the chances that you're going to get punched, that you're going to get stabbed, that you're going to have human waste thrown on you. So it's an isolating environment and tends to be a negative environment.
I was taught defensive tactics. I was taught situational awareness. I was taught how to do searches, but I wasn't really taught how to take care of me. I was in a place after 19 years in corrections that I really didn't want to be. I felt sick all the time. I would get in my vehicle on my way to work and would literally have to stop and, throw up.
We know that our corrections staff have higher rates of PTSD than even combat veterans. We know that our suicidality rates are higher than kind of average population or comparative groups. It takes incredible emotional, relational savvy for our staff to be effective with the people in custody. So we decided to introduce mindfulness into corrections.
I kind of thought about mindfulness. What is that? Is it some sort of yoga hippie thing? And then I thought, I have to find out for myself.
It's simply being more aware, more present. That's mindfulness.
I started my career in 1994 as a correctional officer, and I have journeyed through for 22 years. When I showed up, it really was kind of that classic macho culture where you don't ask for help, you don't show weakness.
I think among criminal justice professionals, they're only recently realizing that they're kind of in trouble in the sense of the health dangers of continuing to do their jobs the way they had been doing them.
The average is after somebody retires, 5 to 10 years, and you pass away. I would like to not become a statistic.
I've seen too many coworkers take their own lives. I've seen way too many funerals.
I consider myself one of the statistics at this point. I've got high blood pressure. I've got high cholesterol. And I've noticed that in doing some of the breathing exercises and some of the mindful-based practices, I've able to lower my blood pressure.
This mindfulness training, I think, really equips our staff to show up to do a job and then to be able to show back up at home to transition out of that.
And I'm going to take some of these things and with the help with the class, I will learn to deal with things at work better and at home.
It is an investment. When you look at the amount of sick time or unpaid leave time and other kinds of costs, I think when we can make those connections with the data, we can show it's worth the price.
When you keep everything inside, something's bound to break. Using those tools, I'm able to talk and I'm able to communicate a whole lot better than I was before. And I think the inmates see that too.
At the end of the day, we need to interact with these inmates in a way that will help them release to the community and be healthy and productive. Where mindfulness helps reset that bar for folks that are struggling is it gives them a calm center to work from and to engage, to let go some of that negativity bias, to be aware of themselves, to be aware of the impact they're having on their fellow staff and on the inmates.
I had an inmate that had a mental
Okay. All right. So I hope that came through all right. Was everybody able to hear and see that? Yeah, great. Yeah, so that kind of gives you a window into that world. And, I think a lot of folks that get involved in prison work, their focus is mostly on the incarcerated. And we often tend to view the incarcerated as the victims. And they're the victims of the system, and it's not to say that there isn't all kinds of injustice in our criminal justice system. There is certainly very racially biased, and most people that end up in prison were themselves victimized as children. Not all, but many. There was a training that I brought into the prison where I was that I then led for, well, up until the pandemic, uh, for 20 years after I got out. And very intense program. You can't do it online, so that's why we haven't led it in a while. But anyway, we brought that in, and it was a 3 day intense training, about 12 hours a day, where we take people deep into their family of origin conditioning and shift their relationship to that. Very intense, physical, can be confrontational, involves physical holding, sick work. It's very intense training. It was amazing we ever got into that prison. If they'd known what it was, they probably wouldn't have let it in. But it was there, and it was very transformational. At any rate, we would have 30 prisoners each time, and I was recruiting them, and they were kind of self-selecting, but from every racial background, every criminal background, every religious background, or non-religious. And every time, I'd say 85 to 90% of the participants, once they started talking about, revealing their past, had experienced severe physical, emotional, or sexual child abuse, or all three. And you just look at, you wonder, a lot of them, hear their stories. Most of them had never shared it with anyone. And here they were sharing it with their fellow incarcerated, their fellow men in that prison, and they were uh, being that vulnerable and holding each other in that space. And but you'd hear the stories, and you just think it's amazing they're even alive still, or that they haven't done more harm than they've done, right? So, so that nonetheless, that doesn't mean we don't have to hold people accountable when they're out, you know, behaving in the world in ways that are harmful. We do, and we have to provide security for the population. So, um, nonetheless, our criminal justice system is very draconian. It's very ineffective. It's grounded in outdated religious ideas and pseudoscience. It's not grounded in current science of any kind, for the most part. So, a lot of problems with it. But nonetheless, most people that end up incarcerated did do something to get there. So they're not all innocent, or in fact, the vast, very few are actually innocent. Fortunately, there are projects like the Innocence Project that's gotten a lot of convicted murderers out who were innocent, and with use of DNA, um, and so things like that. But the vast majority of prisoners are there. They've gotten there for a reason. Nonetheless, they are extremely over prosecuted, and there's a lot of injustice in it. So, and most when you talk to most incarcerated persons, they will bring forth their victim story. The most of them are very caught up in their own victim story. Society views them as the perpetrators; they view themselves as victims. And as I said, rightly so in many cases. Although that doesn't really help them very much if they stay stuck in that. Um, Nonetheless, outside volunteers like ourselves, liberal, progressive-minded, mindfulness folks that go into prisons, we tend to see them, the incarcerated, as the victims, and see the correctional staff and the correctional officers and the rest of the staff as the enemy, right? And that's not at all helpful. And I think you can see from that film that the corrections professionals are just normal human beings like the rest of us, and with all the same needs and feelings and so forth, and also a lot of trauma in their own backgrounds. I would say what you have in the world of prisons, you have two traumatized populations. You have the residents, or the incarcerated, and you have the staff. And people don't end up working in prisons by accident, right? They're drawn there for a reason. So in some cases, it's just a good job, good pay, good benefits, but still, they're drawn there for some reason. And a lot of them come from similar backgrounds that the incarcerated come from in many cases. And a lot of them have a lot of trauma in their background. And then a lot of them are vets. There's a lot of military vets and have a lot of combat trauma. And then some of them end up coming from the military, working in community policing and law enforcement, and have trauma from there, and then go to corrections, right? And so there's very complex trauma on both sides. And in a way, the system is set up, the culture is set up, I would say, not necessarily by design, but the de facto culture ends up being such that it's very polarized. Both sides demonize the other side. In general, let's not say everyone in those, both sides does that, but in general, and it's a very adversarial relationship in an extremely low trust environment. And so there's this cycle of re-traumatization. The staff and the incarcerated are both re-traumatizing each other continually. And that's what that world is like. And I lived in maximum security prison for 14 years, so obviously I'm quite familiar with it. And I discovered a lot of humanity on both sides, both among my fellow prisoners and among the staff during my experience. So in our training of volunteers going into prison, we really emphasize that if you go in there with the attitude that the incarcerated are the victims and you're viewing the staff as the enemy or the persecutors, that's not helpful at all. You're just going to perpetuate unhelpful dynamics for everyone involved. And we base a lot of our work, we include in both our Path to Freedom program and in the Mindfulness-Based Wellness and Resiliency program that we bring to public safety professionals. We use a lot of elements from my radical responsibility model, if you're familiar with my book, and also from, I have a copy of it here somewhere. And in that book, I use Stephen Cartman's drama triangle a lot. And that was also a big part of that training that we led in the prison that I helped bring into the prison while I was there, and I continue to lead after I got out, called The Event. And so Cartman's drama triangle, which has Stephen Cartman's actually still alive. You can look him up. And he developed this model. He was a psychologist, and his model in transpersonal psychology, not transpersonal, transactional analysis. I'm sorry, transactional analysis. Not as popular these days, but a really wonderful model of psychology and psychotherapy. And the whole parent-adult-child ego states comes from that, things like that. At any rate, this idea was that you have this drama triangle, which is the triangulation that creates all the conflict we see in our lives, internally within ourselves, with others, whether it's in our relationships, our families, our community, at work, and the world at large with the never-ending cycles of war and traumatization that are happening in the world, right? So someone perceives themselves to be in the victim position. They perceive someone or something else to be in a persecutor position, and generally we then try to reach out to someone else to be in a rescuer position. That's from the perspective of being caught in the victim mindset, but it can start off anywhere. And we don't, so Cartman's trauma, it's the classic, melodrama, right? Hero, villain, and victim, right? But in Cartman's language, he used persecutor, rescuer, and victim. Now, it's important to understand that these aren't names or labels we're giving to people. Not at all. That's very important. These are mindsets. These are psychological positions, psychological mindsets, personas that we all get caught up in, right? And they're all about power, and they're all about getting our needs met. And we can get some level of power from any one of these positions, and we do get some needs met, and there are emotional payoffs. But I would say it's all very superficial. It creates endless conflict and chaos, and it's like the junk food of the emotional world, right? Quick payoff but lasting suffering, right? And so we don't really want to be caught in any of these positions. And in many ways, I've said this again and again, people may not agree with me, but many times I think the worst one is the rescuer mindset. Because the rescuer operates ostensibly as the hero, riding into the rescue. I'm the good person, I'm the rescuer, right? But what are they doing? They're colluding with the victim mindset. And they're helping other people, they're disempowering other people, and really colluding with other people, remaining caught in the victim mindset. Now, I'm not in any way suggesting that people aren't victimized. People are victimized terribly. And when they are, they may need that recognized. Also, we're talking about adults here. We're not talking about children. So they may need that recognized. They may need a lot of support. But what we're talking about is the victim mindset, where we get stuck in that powerless and we get stuck in blaming our current situation on someone or something else, which completely disempowers us because we can't control what's out there. The only thing we have any control over is our own choices and our own behaviors. So as understandable it is for people to get stuck in a victim mindset, it's not that we want to go around telling people you need to get off your victim trip, but we want to have tremendous compassion for everyone's situation. But we certainly don't want to collude with them and support them in staying stuck there. We would hope that anybody no matter what happened to, at some point would find a way to go on with their lives without remaining stuck in a victim identity, right? And there are countless examples of people who've been through the worst possible victimizations and have found some way to turn that around and move forward with their lives, right? So anyway, when we go into prisons, we don't want to perpetuate that triangulation, that dynamic. It's not helpful for the prisoners. It's not helpful for the staff, and it's not helpful for us, right? So that's a big part of our training with volunteers. And really, we train our volunteers and this is the way I feel, and this is the way we train our volunteers. If I'm going into a prison, into a correctional facility of any kind, I'm there to serve everyone. I'm there to treat everyone with kindness and respect and bring the most value I can to everybody I encounter in there, regardless of the role they're in, right? So that's the way we view our work. And so on the side of the corrections staff, they're working in a highly toxic environment, which they have a role in co-creating, but not solely. It's co-created by everybody involved. And it's set up by the system in many ways. I'm not letting the system or us or the government or whoever we want to, anybody off the hook, right? But nonetheless, it is the way it is. And within that system, both sides are constantly co-creating this toxic environment. And so as a result of that, people who work in prisons, in whatever role they're in, and we have a lot of studies around this, a lot of research, scientific studies, and recent ones even, showing that every role is impacted. In fact, the highest are like the wardens. The upper level managers experience the highest levels of stress and the resultant negative impacts on their health. Then come, I think correctional officers is next. Probation and parole officers are very close. But even chaplains, recreational officers, clinical staff, wellness folks, anybody that works in a prison is highly infected. In fact, research says that over 50% of all of them have at one time or another reached out for mental health support, reporting around issues of anxiety disorders, panic disorders, PTSD, alcohol abuse, anxiety, etc., like things like that. So over 50% of correctional staff reach out for that, and with the ones most exposed, it's over 60%. As one of the participants in that program you saw in the video, I think reference, she talked about you retire as a corrections professional, and 4, 5, 6 years you die. The statistics say. Well, it can be even worse than that. A study in the last decade that was done in North America pointed to that correctional officers that work in secure facilities for 20 years or more have a life expectancy of 59 years. Imagine that, 2 decades less than the general population. So how are they dying? They're dying from all the chronic stress-related ailments, cardiovascular illnesses, obese, and all the maladaptive coping mechanisms that create further illness. So diabetes and obesity and suicide, very high levels of suicide. PTSD, the levels of PTSD is very similar to or equal to that of combat veterans. Levels of PTSD very similar to that of combat veterans. And they have constant exposure to very high stress and both primary and secondary trauma. So what is primary trauma? Primary trauma is when we are directly impacted in a traumatic incident or we directly witness it. So if you're a correctional officer, this could be like you saw there, getting attacked physically or breaking up a fight, or there's blood on the tier, or having waste thrown on you, or some kind of thing that you're directly involved in or directly witnessed, right? That's primary trauma. Now there's, and obviously whenever that happens to someone, traditionally they were just told, suck it up and deal with it, right? And there was no counseling around it. Even still today, there's a tendency to be kind of macho about it, right? And just go on, right? So, but we are working hard to change that. And a lot of correctional agencies are working to change that. Secondary trauma can be just as insidious or maybe more so because it's kind of like the silent killer. So secondary trauma has two forms. One is when we hear about these kind of incidents happening. Now this impacts all of us, all human beings today in modern culture, because we all hear about all the terrible stuff happening in the world all the time. Now, not so many generations ago, you probably just heard about the bad stuff that happened on your block or in your little village, right? Your community, your neighborhood. And then with newspapers, you'd hear about everything that happened in your town or your city. And then once we had network news, you'd hear about everything that happened in your country and some of the stuff around the world. And now with 24/7 cable, we hear about literally every terrible thing that happens in the world. And that's what the news shows us 24/7. They don't show us all the good stuff happening in the world, right? So we're all exposed to that. And that impacts us, which is why in all of our training programs, both through our nonprofit and through Heart Mind Institute, the other company that I direct, we're continually encouraging people not to be caught in doom scrolling and to really titrate your exposure to the news. Not to live in a bubble, we need to know what's going on, but not to be overexposed to that negativity because it is traumatizing for all of us. It's very activating to our autonomic nervous system, to our fight or flight response, and it can be traumatizing and re-traumatizing. So, and specific examples, think, when there are these terrible school shootings that happen, right? Imagine how parents react to that, right? Parent immediately checking their cell phone, checking for news. Is my kid okay, right? Right? Maybe some of you experienced that. A number of years back, there was a terrible mass shooting in a King Superstore out in Boulder, Colorado. Somebody, a friend who lives in Boulder, just reminded me of that the other day. But there was a terrible mass shooting in a King supermarket in Boulder, Colorado, and it came on the news. And I was here on the East Coast where I live now, and but it just like I felt like just a punch in my gut because I used to shop in that store all the time. I lived in Boulder for 20 years. I used to shop in that store all the time, and I just felt like I got punched in the gut. So this stuff impacts us, right? Well, when you work in a prison, you hear about everything that happens. If there's an incident, it just travels like wildfire throughout that particular institution, and then it travels throughout that correctional system as well. So they all hear about all the horrible stuff. And somewhere in the back of our brain, when that's going on, whether we realize it or not, in the back of our brain, there's a conversation going on that says, that could have been me. And whether we realize it or not, to one degree or another, we're having the same fight or flight activation of our autonomic nervous system, that same exaggerated sympathetic response. We're having a neurochemical reaction, just like the person to whom it's happening, just like the primary trauma. Not to the same degree, but the same thing, right? Now, if that's happening again and again over time and happening on a really regular basis, that's building up, right? And it will build up over time, and eventually our system will say enough is enough. Not consciously, unconsciously, our system will start shutting itself down to protect itself. And now we're going from empathic distress into burnout, right? And we start shutting down. We start losing our capacity to feel. If we're working in a secure environment, we're a danger to ourselves and others because, like, the lights are on but nobody's home. We're just going through the motions. We're not really fully present at all, right? And that's very common in this work. A lot of employees experiencing severe burnout, right? So so you have both these forms of trauma exposure that are just continual in that environment. And in terms of stress, so the minute you arrive at an institution and you go through the sally port, right, where one secure door opens, you're in this area, and then it closes, the other opens, and now you're into the secure prison. Your whole system's on alert. I don't care if you work there every day, your whole system's on alert, right? And for good reason. You're in a secure environment and a potentially dangerous environment. You may not be in a dangerous part of it yet. You may be in an administrative area, right? But still, your whole system's on alert, right? And it stays that way. And so you're in a stress response state. Now, many of us are in a stress response state most of the time in modern life, and we've gotten used to it. That's what we call stress, the stress of modern life. And the problem is we adapt to it and get used to it, and we're living, we should have that, the stress response is completely normal. We need a stress response to respond to stressful things. And we should get the stress response, respond, and then we should be able to go back down to a rest and recovery response, right? Well, modern human beings have lost that capacity to go back down. We've unlearned how to do it. It's what Herbert Benson, medical doctor and researcher at Harvard, coined the term the relaxation response back in the 1970s, saying that all other species have this natural relaxation response, right? You see your dog or cat at home, there's UPS driver comes to the door or something, and the dog goes into the alarm barking, the cat arches its back, starts hissing, right? And then they leave. What happens? They just plop right back down on the living room carpet into nap time, right? And they can turn it on and turn it off just like that. Well, we've unlearned that ability. We've unlearned the relaxation response largely. So a lot of stress management is about relearning that. A lot of mindfulness is about relearning that. Relearning the relaxation response, right? Well, most people in corrections, before they're introduced to these things, they have no access to the relaxation response, right? So they stay up there. And we get used to it, right? And not only that, whatever state we're in, whatever physiological, emotional, cognitive state we're in, there's a neurochemical mix that goes with that. And it can be a mixture of testosterone and adrenaline and noradrenaline and acetylcholine and what's the other one they call the bonding hormone? Oxytocin and estrogen. There's all these different neurochemicals and dopamine and all the rest of it. And there's a particular mix, right? Just like you could put this much of that, this like a rest. There's a mix. When you're sad, when you're angry, when you're excited, when you're happy, when you're glad, when you're depressed, when you're alarmed, when you're scared, there's a particular mix. And whatever neurochemical mix is in our brain, most of the time, guess what? We get used to it. Not only do we get used to it, we get addicted to it. That's just the way the brain works. The brain adapts to it and becomes addicted to it. That becomes its new normal. And so if we get out of that stress state, we'll actually unconsciously go looking for it again because that's become what we're familiar with, right? And so now we're living up here in the stress zone somewhere and we don't know it. Somebody could ask you, are you feeling stressed out? No, I feel fine. I'm good. And if we did a blood test, we'd see you have way too much cortisol and adrenaline, noradrenaline in your bloodstream. You are in the stress zone. You don't even know it. Well, you take people who work in professions like correction and frontline medical workers and community police and others, boom, it's up here, and they get used to it. And when we live up here, there are incredibly negative health impacts. So we know today that most chronic illnesses, all the cardiovascular illnesses, a lot of the cancers, metabolic illnesses, immune, what do you call it, immune something illnesses, things like chronic fatigue and all those kind of things, are the roots of all those things is systemic inflammation. And that systemic inflammation usually happens decades. It begins decades before you see the symptoms. Decades. Now let's just take cardiovascular illness for one. So the systemic inflammation caused by living up in the stress zone, and one of the things there is too much cortisol in the bloodstream. That very directly has impacts on our circulatory system, vascular health, and so forth. But this systemic inflammation is, if you cut your finger, right, you'll see it gets red around the wound, right? That's inflammation. It's part of the healing response. It gets red, increased blood there. Eventually a little cut heals if we take care of it, but it's red around, eventually it goes away. That's inflammation, right? That's what we mean by inflammation. So inflammation can happen throughout the body as a result of exposure to stress and trauma. And that inflammation, when it's systemic throughout the body, is eating away at, our physiology. It's really has a corrosive effect. Corrosive, I think, is a good word. It has a corrosive impact. So think about the vascular system for a minute, our circulatory blood vessels, right? So this systemic inflammation is creating little tiny cracks and fissures on the inside of our veins and arteries, little microscopic. But guess what happens with those cracks? That's where the plaque gets stuck. And so over the years, that's what creates the plaque buildup. And then eventually you end up with arteriosclerosis, you end up with, a blocked artery, you got to go in for, a bypass surgery or whatever. Well, that by the time somebody is starting to have shortness of breath or, has a heart attack or has something else that leads them to go to the doctor and they got to have bypass surgery or get a stent put in or something, that problem originated 20, 25 years before that, at least, right? Right? And it's all based in the chronic stress and trauma exposure. Now, and that's happening not just to our vascular system, it's happening with all of our organs, it's happening the gut. It interrupts, creates an unhealthy gut. And then the way we respond, the way we cope with that stress is mostly, until we learn to do otherwise, is maladaptive coping mechanisms. So we do emotional eating and we substance abuse with alcohol and other substances, right? We get involved in addictions, in things like gambling and porn addiction and all kinds of addictions. And it creates, and also because we're in that state of stress, our relationships tend to be full of drama so where our relationships are a source of conflict and more stress rather than being a source of resilience, right? So we're basically living in this, we're living in enemy territory. Our body has become not a good place to be. And so we're not even embodied. We live up here somewhere in our heads or out there somewhere, right? And so it's just a never-ending cycle. And then what are we creating with others? We're disconnected from ourselves. We're creating disconnection with others. And you see all the suffering we have in our modern world, right? This is where it all comes from. So, as a result of this, correctional officers have a life expectancy of 59 years and are dying from all the chronic stress-related ailments and suicide. So this is what our work is addressing. Now, you can imagine the relationship with correctional officers who have untreated, unmanaged chronic stress, untreated, unmanaged trauma. How do they interact with the incarcerated citizens? Not so great, right? And of course, the incarcerated citizens also have untreated trauma, untreated, unmanaged chronic stress, right? So how do they treat the correctional staff? Thus, you have this continual cycle of retraumatization. So how do we transform? I mean, we'd like legislative change over time. Our nonprofits are not advocacy organizations. We sign on to various things, but it's limited how much political advocacy you can do as a nonprofit, or you lose your status. You have to be a different kind of entity to do political advocacy and so forth. But nonetheless, we sign on to, end the death penalty things and so on. To limit available that we're able to do those things, we do. And we really need legislative change to reduce the size of our prison population. We really should just be locking up violent offenders, people who are at risk to themselves and others. Everybody else should be in some kind of community treatment, some kind of community corrections programs, which have been proven to work. But when somebody in a parole or probation program or community corrections program goes out and commits a crime, then the media plays it up and they want to lock everybody up again. And we've been in that cycle forever. So we need to get a lot of the people who are in prison out of prison. But as long as they're there, what can we do to make it a healthier environment? Well, we have to teach both the incarcerated and the staff how to take better care of themselves so they can heal their own trauma, manage their own stress, interact with each other in more positive ways, and end the cycle of retraumatization, right? And so that's what our work is all about, and we try to work on all sides of that equation. Let's see if there was a couple more things I want to do. How are we doing on time, right? I want to leave. We'll open it up to dialogue in just a minute. So, So the program, the 10-week mindfulness-based wellness and resiliency program, the video you saw was Huffington Post came in and filled a day one of our 10-week training. Our 10-week training is you have a full day of training, like a 7-8 hour training. Then that's followed by 8 weekly community practice groups. These are 2-hour sessions facilitated by facilitators we train locally. Originally it was all live. We now have hybrid versions where some of it happens online. But we train facilitators. Well, we trained a lot of facilitators when we were in Oregon. We've trained a lot of facilitators in the province of Ontario. We've trained facilitators, a lot of facilitators in California and other places in the country. And we reach out and we find folks that are either already in our network or we just reach out and find them who have a strong mindfulness background and ideally some training in facilitation. And we train them in our model and they facilitate these community practice groups. And each community practice group has a 2-hour, same 2-hour structure. And it starts off with just reinforcing the operating agreements for the group a little bit briefly, a little more time in the first group to that. Then there's usually just maybe a brief body scan just to get everybody in the room. And then there's a check-in dialogue to see where people are at, what's going on, how they're doing, because we want the sessions to be relevant to what's going on with them right now. So people in a circle format using the same consult process we use in the 7 Peacemakers, they share what's going on with them, whatever they voluntarily feel comfortable sharing. And then there's usually some breath work and some movement, mindful movement stuff. And then they go into the second hour, and the second hour is more, there's a break, and then the second hour is more thematic. So the second hour, there's a dyad process around a particular theme, and then that kind of gets the pump primed. Then you go from the dyad into a general group discussion in the circle around that theme, and then you finish off with a extended mindfulness practice section of 15 minutes or so, and then some kind of final. Often we do what we call our safe resource and connected contemplation at the end. So we pack a lot in 2 hours. 2 hours goes by pretty fast, and so each of the 8 sessions has a different theme. So the first 4 are on 4 areas of self-care, right? So taking care of ourselves physically is the first week, emotionally, mentally is the second week, emotionally is the third week, and spiritually is the fourth week, right? And then the second 4 weeks are built around the 4 quadrants of Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence model. So, and this has a lot of application to how they bring this into their work, their daily lives at work. So the first one is around self-awareness, creating greater awareness of what makes us tick, which naturally gives us better ability to self-regulate. But also with awareness, we can begin to have more awareness of some of the internal conditioning that's not so helpful, all the negative core beliefs, limiting, all that kind of stuff. We could begin to work to transform some of that and create a more positive inner environment. And then the second week is self-regulation, self-management. So there we're teaching specific self-regulation skills. And then the third week is social awareness, environmental awareness, being empathic awareness with others. And good self-awareness, good self-regulation makes us better able to co-regulate and have greater relational and emotional awareness with others. And then the fourth week is fourth quadrant, his model is relationship management. So that's how we interact with others. So good communication skills, co-regulation skills, and so forth. So those are the 8 weeks of that program. And we've done a lot of research with it. We're getting ready to publish research. We collected a lot of data in both Oregon and Ontario, as well as in Colorado and some other places, and dramatic results. We find, and anecdotally, we have just reams and reams of their anecdotal reports, qualitative data of them describing what's happening while they're in the program, following the program, that they're sleeping for the first time in their careers, that they're getting off of blood pressure medications, that their relationship with their family at home is transforming, that they're able to relate with the incarcerated in completely new ways, in different ways. All kinds of dramatic effects on their physical and mental health and their relationships and so forth. So we have a lot of strong research, and then we have quantitative research from because they before they start any 10-week program, they do a pre-test and they do a post-test, and we do follow-ups at 3 months and 6 months and 9 months and so forth. So I think that's probably enough about the program to give you a good window into that work. We brought the same work to sheriff's departments. And in sheriff's departments, some of the staff we work with are working in the county jail of that county, and some are out in the squad cars, community police. We've worked with the Border Patrol at the border in El Cerritos, California, which is a very hot area of the border, both in terms of enforcement, but in terms of it was 115 degrees when we were there. But it's also a very tense area of the U.S.-Mexico border. So we worked with training U.S. Border Patrol peer support officers in good self-regulation skills, self-care skills. We've trained probation and parole officers a lot. We train a lot of probation and parole officers in Canada, and we've trained community corrections workers and probation and parole in Colorado and other states. And we've also done trainings for mental health, mental health workers and frontline medical workers. And we have a weekly call every Wednesday. We have a call that's been going out. We started it at the beginning of the lockdowns. We started it in 2020. We started like in May of 2020. And it's happened every Wednesday since then. Here we are in 2025. Every Wednesday without fault. And we have one of our staff and one of our volunteers who very faithfully run it. I was on every call for about the first 2 years. And I just attend periodically now, often as doing a guest presentation. But it's a 2-hour basically community practice group, a little less structured, but it has structure. And we practice and we have dialogue together. And we often have guest presentations by corrections professionals, especially corrections professionals who are very involved in various kinds of wellness training and so forth. But we have people on there. It started off to be for Indiana. And we have a lot of connections in Indianapolis and Indiana. And so it was Indiana Department of Corrections. It was the Marion County, which is Indianapolis, the county Indianapolis is in, Marion County Sheriff's Department. It was local mental health services. It was local hospital folks. It was police, fire, emergency. So really the whole world of public safety, mental health, and some frontline medical staff come to that. And now we opened it up and we're encouraging people from around the country to come to that meeting. So that meeting's been going on. And it's amazing to attend that meeting and to hear what's going on for these folks. And it's amazing to, during the pandemic, to be bearing witness. You know, that's a lot of our work as well, is we go into prisons and we work with the incarcerated, we work with the staff, we're bearing witness to their suffering. That's the ground of our work, right? And we bear witness to ourselves as we put ourselves in those environments. So it was really interesting being on this call, especially, but I was on it every week during the pandemic, and what they were going through, because public safety professionals and medical professionals were under extreme stress during the pandemic and the lockdowns. Oh my goodness. Just really, really tough stuff. And so such dedicated professionals keeping the rest of us safe, putting their own lives at risk and their families at risk by continually exposing themselves during the lockdowns to do their jobs, right? There was a big protest in Indianapolis at one point. I can't remember. There was some shootings. So I think it was in relation to some police shootings and probably kind of a Black Lives Matter. I think that was it. There was a big protest, and there was violence, and there was, and so you saw what you saw in the news from one perspective, especially if you watch, tend to watch the more liberal side of the news. And I'm not saying that what they were pointing to wasn't correct, but at the same time, to also bear witness to these officers who were there responding to it, right, and risking their lives, right? So very interesting to get these different perspectives on what we see in terms of the whole world of criminal justice and public safety. Um, and going back to our bearing witness model and our founder Barry Glassman's work, it was always about including all the voices, including all the voices. So originally with the Auschwitz retreat, which is kind of the mothership of bearing witness retreats, we've had bearing witness retreats in many places in the world and continue to do so. Um, but the idea was to have everybody who wants to come who has a relationship with the Holocaust, with Auschwitz. So it's a lot of people with Jewish heritage come there, but a lot of Poles come there, and they have a whole national history, national karma around that. Uh, um, the German people who have their own, obviously, history. And at different times we've had, it was, I don't think there were any living former German officers that ever came, but we had children of Nazi officers that came. And we had survivors of the camps that came. Really trying to, we had, when the Zen Peacemakers did work in um, uh, the Middle East and in Israel. We didn't want to just have a nice peace circle with all the peaceniks from either side. We wanted representation from Hamas and from all the different PLO and the different organizations. We wanted uh, uh, both Israeli citizens of both Jewish and Palestinian origin. We wanted occupied territory residents, both Islamic and Christian. There are Palestinian Christians. We try to get everybody involved, right? So bearing witness always involves listening to all the voices, hearing all the voices, including the voices inside ourselves as we're bearing witness. So that's an important principle in working with our, trying to bring healing and sanity to our criminal justice and public safety systems, uh, is this bearing witness from that perspective, not knowing, bearing witness, and what originally was called healing, and then loving action, sometimes compassionate action. Towards the end of his life, Bernie just wanted to say the actions that arise from bearing witness from a place of not knowing without qualifying it. But the three tenets have been a lifesaver for me. It's been my anchor. It's what allowed me to do the work that I do around the world for a long time, going into really difficult places and not getting polarized. And I get triggered like anybody else. I can get polarized like anybody else. Um, but, I recognize it happening, and I try to come back to that place of not knowing and bearing witness, because we need to bring healing to everybody, not just the people we like, not just the people we think are right, and so forth. So anyway, that's enough for me. Let's open it up and see what kind of questions or comments or insights you'd like to share. I hope that's been helpful, giving you a window into that world. So
Yeah,
please jump
thank you,
in.
Fleet. That was
hmm
wonderful. Yeah, we're a small group, so please just unmute and ask a question. And I'll start off. Um, uh, Fleet, it seems like in a lot of different industries, mindfulness training has been great help, like in the oil industry with offshore drilling rigs. Um, I know Shell did a study, reduced their accident rates by over 80%. And that was, maybe even 30 years ago. I think it was in the late 90s. Do you find like there's still resistance in the industries that you present this to, as far as what type of resistance do you face in implementing these programs?
Well, up until the current administration, there was less and less resistance all the time. um, the uh, when we're working with public safety professionals, we make it all about them. We're there to support them, their wellness. I always tell people my goal is that you can have a wonderful career, a long and healthy retirement with your family. Right? That's what we're here for, to give you the skills to work. We're also to help you, support you, and empower you so that you can help make your system different. Because everybody feels victimized in the system. They're constantly complaining about their management and the management union issues, and they feel unsupported by management. You talk to managers, they feel victimized by the staff and or by the politicians. It's everybody's. So we try to support them and empower them in system change, but ultimately we're there to help give them the skills to take better care of themselves, no matter what they're facing, right? And so we make it very. We're not there to help to tell them what to do with prisoners, right? Has nothing to do with that. When we go in to work with incarcerated citizens, it's all about them. We're there to support them and help them, have the do the best they can with their time, and hopefully get out and have a better life when they get out, right? So, so there's less and less resistance over time. In terms of mindfulness per se, the practice that we find public safety professionals gravitate to the quickest are the breath regulation practices, because they're simple to learn and they have immediate impact. So we teach really simple things, and you'll see it on our website here under resources. If you want to go to our website, there's straw breathing, basic mindfulness, box breathing, body scan, diaphragmatic breathing, close placement breathing. Those are right there on the website. But we also have an app that's available to, well, anybody can find it. It's called CMPS Mindfulness. You can find it in the App Store, CMPS Mindfulness. And we've made that available in correctional agencies that we've worked with. And they have those practices on there. But they really gravitate to straw breathing and other things where they can just immediately, begin to regulate their own autonomic nervous system. If they're all stressed out, you do a little straw breathing. If you can learn it in 30 seconds, and you have an experience right away. Now, developing a consistent, regular meditation practice is tougher. But, we were advocating for years to do retreats. So finally in Oregon, we did 3 weekend immersive retreats that were sitting and walking mindfulness all day long, like an intense retreat many of us have been to, and in silence. Well, we arrived there Friday afternoon at orientation, and then had an initial mindfulness practice, dinner, another practice session, then we're in silence, and then you wake up Saturday in silence, all the meals are in silence, the whole day in silence, sitting, walking, Sunday morning, breakfast in silence, practice Sunday morning, and then eventually we break into small groups, dialogue groups, and then a big final checkout circle, right? Very powerful program. I have another video of that I was looking for, but it should be on our website somewhere. But we probably don't have time to watch that now anyway. But anyway, we did 3 of those in Oregon, and then Oregon basically got shut down when the lockdown started. We're talking to them again about possibly bringing the program back there. In Ontario, Canada, we were continually advocating for that. They finally approved it, and we've done 2 now. We did one just recently in April, and one in the previous April, and we're going to do one more in the next April, and we're trying to convince them to do another one in between now and then. And so and there's a lottery to get into those. Long waiting list and a lottery to get into it, and people so some people really get into the practice. Now, among the management, I'd say there's almost no resistance at all anymore. In fact, in the province of Ontario, we've done special programs for all the top leadership, including the minister over that ministry, which is called the acronym is SOLGA, and it's the Ministry of the Solicitor General, which is over all of corrections, all of probation and parole, and also the provincial police, right? So the minister, all their lieutenants, then all the top correctional management, and then we did one for middle management, we did one for clinical people, medical management. They've had us work with every aspect of their system, so no resistance. They eat it up, now, unfortunately, one of the graduates of our mindfulness teacher training, and we've trained, I think, 10 corrections professionals now and certified them as mindfulness teachers through the Engaged Mindfulness through our teacher training. But one of our outside people who also did volunteer work in Oregon in Ontario with us and other places, he worked for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, something like that, right? NOAA, you've probably heard of NOAA, right? So, and they've been defunded a lot by the current administration. And so we aren't going to get the early warnings around hurricanes that we're used to and so forth. Really terrible things going on. That's maybe not even the worst of it. But at any rate, he was at NOAA, and he started a project at NOAA called Mindful NOAA. And eventually it got more widespread, and they actually let him make that his primary job, directing Mindful NOAA. Then he got hired by, I think it was the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, in the feds, to head up a project called Mindful Fed. And he was full time heading up a program called Mindful Fed to get mindfulness throughout the federal agency and the federal bureaucracy, right? When the Trump administration came in, the minute Trump was elected, that program was shut down, and he was fired, and he's now outside of government. So that's one of the results that's going on. But I would say inside corrections and public safety, very little resistance, and there's many more people, corrections professionals, police, fire, emergency corrections professionals, who themselves have become yoga teachers and mindfulness teachers and breathwork teachers. You know, the science is there, people know it works, and they gravitate toward it pretty readily. Yeah. Somebody else.
Well, I had an original question about whether it sounds very much like mental health. Like one of my first jobs out of college was working with the chronically mentally ill in warehousing type situations, and the stress and trauma there seems similar to what you were describing for folks working in prisons and in the police systems. But you mentioned you guys have expanded to that, so that was kind of fascinating to me. I guess my question is, I was wondering if someone was interested in exploring some volunteer opportunities with your organization, where might one go?
Yeah, so well, you go to our website, and then there's contact us through the website. So there's Prison Mindfulness, which is prisonmindfulness.org, right? Prisonmindfulness.org. And you can contact that organization about volunteer work in prisons. And you can find out about various projects around the country that we don't run, but are part of it. We have Prison Dharma Network, which is a network of all the projects and organizations that do this kind of work. So you can find out about what projects or organizations are active in your area that you might want to go volunteer with. And then there may be Path of Freedom programs that we may not be running directly, but are being operated by people we've trained under our brand, under Path of Freedom. So you can find out what's going on in your areas and have those opportunities. You can just reach out to Prison Mindfulness Institute through the website. For the work with corrections professionals and other public safety professionals, you could, if you were interested in volunteering with that, you could reach out to John at mindfulpublicsafety.org. So our website is mindfulpublicsafety.org. But John McAdams, who lives in LA, he's the program director for that program and manages all the volunteer operations. So I think, wait a minute, I may have that wrong. I think it's not John, but it's J Mac. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I'm sorry. So capital J, capital M, A, C, J Mac. I don't think the capitals make any difference. But JMAC for John McAdams, JMAC at mindfulpublicsafety.org. Just reach out to him and let him know you're interested.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, thanks so much for your presentation. I never work in the context of a prison, but I can see the benefit. What are you talking about? In the past, I lived in Vancouver for almost 50 years, and I just moved to Ontario. That I'm very curious of in Ontario that you're talking about the programs. I have someone who probably be very interested to work with a younger person to be involved in mindfulness programs. It reminded me many, many years ago we did a program in Vancouver on what we call restorative justice. You probably heard about that. And it was not mindful based, but there was an attempt of being witnessing the people and helping them. And I am someone who ran groups of what you call the two sides, survivors of torture and torturers
Right.
and sex offenders and
Victim reconciliation groups and that kind of
yeah.
thing,
And I learned that the witnessing, the listening, the voices, it's so relevant to those kind of experiences, and it's transformational, not only for those involved, but those of us who are providing services as well. Then I appreciate it. All the best for you.
Thank you very much. And we consider our work to be part of the restorative justice movement and the transformative justice movement. I like the term transformative justice. It goes a little deeper, the model. They're both wonderful models, but transformative justice goes even deeper, I think, into the roots of where harm comes from. And that term is used more in Canada and New Zealand and Australia, has some connections with the Quaker movement and things. But anyway, both restorative and transformative justice, we consider ourselves to be part of that movement. And yeah, the work in Ontario, sadly, and we're trying to figure out ways now to support that work to keep going. But another result of the Trump administration, the Canadian government and the Ontario provincial government has now decided to end all contracts with U.S. vendors and U.S. organizations, unless we're a U.S. company that had 200 employees in Canada, which we don't. And so our contract will end there next May. And so we're trying to figure out a way to support others to keep that work alive there. But that's a direct result of the shenanigans that's been happening with the Trump administration and the tariffs and all of that. So I don't know if that'll change. If they resolve and get a deal, it may still not resign, because I think it's just such an adversarial relationship at this point with Trump and the way he relates to other foreign leaders and countries. But so anyway, thank you, Jaya. Somebody else.
Um, Hi, this has been really helpful. Thank you so much, Fleet. I'm actually in Portland, Oregon, and I'm a psychotherapist and career counselor, and I have had public safety officials in my practice. And I'm just curious if they were interested in accessing the program in Portland, would they go to your website, theengagedmindfulness.org, to find out about that? Would they contact the department that they're in to find out about programs?
Yeah, so I mean, they could go to the Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety, which is mindfulpublicsafety.org, mindfulpublicsafety.org, in order to connect with resources. They could also, I would encourage them to advocate within their agency. Now, during the years, we worked in Oregon for like 7 years, I think, and we were invited in there originally because there was a lot of suicides, a lot of staff suicides, and they started reaching out. And we had already been working in their system with the incarcerated, so they got connected with us, and we went through a whole round of proposals, and eventually we did all this work there. Our main liaison, a wonderful woman named Kelly, left the agency at one point. She had worked there for many years, and it was just more than she could deal with anymore, I think. But she's on our board now, and Kelly Rath, and she also is a certified mindfulness teacher trained by us. But then the woman who was the director of that whole system, Colette Peters, got hired to be director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. She's a wonderful, and she also heads up with the American Correctional Association. She heads up the ACA Wellness Committee. But the day of Trump's inauguration, Colette Peters was fired, pink slipped. And they brought in some hardcore militaristic kind of right-wing person. So, yeah. But at any rate, I think if they advocate within their system certainly realizes they had a great mindfulness program for many years, and we would love to help resuscitate it. And we have been in touch with people at that agency because we present regularly at the American Correctional Association conferences and the American Jail Association conferences and different places like that. And we run into the Oregon people and we have ongoing conversations with them. So, yeah. Yeah, Portland, beautiful place. Yeah. I lived there briefly back in the 70s.
Yeah. It's coming back.
What else? Somebody else. We're a small group here. Adam, how's this landed for you? Good to see you, by the way.
Hello, Fleet. It's really very inspiring. I actually started in last month's practice of teaching mindfulness for the inmates in a women's prison in Poland. And I wanted to broaden the scope of it, but in some of the prison's education officers wrote back to me, but what's all this meditation about? That's how I found out that it may be also a good idea to teach some meditation to the prison officers to uh, let them have a taste of it. But since I'm already talking, I've got a question to you. I once did with a group of female prisoners. I did metta practice, and I involved a line that's in a traditional version. May I take good care of myself, and it provoked some resistance because some of them told me I always because I'm learning to do this by doing this. I'm not I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just taking the plunge and without the risk involved. So I did the meta practice and I asked how they felt about it. And actually, the strongest resistance in this group was to this statement, may I take good care of myself? Because they said, we cannot take good care of ourselves here. Here we can only survive. We
Yeah.
will be able to take good care of ourselves when we are free, but not now, not here. It's unrealistic.
So that's an opportunity to have a discussion. Um, and the way I might frame that, first of all, I would try to be very empathic and acknowledge, yeah, I realize it's very difficult. A lot of things we would normally think of about taking good care of ourselves in terms of our food choices and all kinds of things that we might do to take good care of ourselves, we can't do in a prison setting, right? But nonetheless, I might ask them, well, so you're well aware of each other and everyone in the prison with you. Are there some people do you think are taking better care of themselves than others? Or some people coping better than others? I mean, there's always things we can do. And there's things we can do internally to take care of ourselves. There's the mindfulness practices, the breath regulation practices. And even with the food that's available, we can still make choices about what we eat. And I don't. They probably even have fewer food choices in those prisons than they do stateside. But and I've been in a lot of Polish prisons, by the way. I used to do prison work there. Every time I visited, I went into a lot of both male and female prisons in and around Warsaw, mostly. Um, and but Yeah, there's always things we can do to take care of ourselves, no matter what the situation we're in. And, that's at the heart of the radical responsibility model. And one of the people I've often pointed to, and many people do, for good reason, Viktor Frankl, very famous, and wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And, he was at Auschwitz in a death camp in the most horrible anybody can, and he still found ways to take care of himself so that he would, find a way to create meaning and survive. And yes, he was surviving, but there, much harder to survive there than even in being in a prison anywhere, regular prison, right? So anyway, there's things they can do. They can be kind to themselves. They can meditate. They can do breath regulation exercises. There's always things we can do that'll help.
And do you think, or what's your experience? Because also for me, it was like a glimpse of intuition to do meta practice with this group. Do you think it's a good practice for people in prison, or maybe it's too
I think
out
it's
of touch with?
no, I think it's an excellent practice. I think it's always good to give people options. So, what statements work for them? They don't have to do that statement, right? Sometimes one of the traditional statements is, may I be safe? I often have people react on that. Well, I'm not safe. How can I say, may I be safe? I'm not safe. I don't feel safe here. Okay. Well, may I be safe in this situation? May I be as safe as I can in this situation, right? So, but also they don't have to do that one. They can pick their own. May I be strong? May I be happy? May I, they can choose the statements that work for them. But the whole thing is to start for them to, these are aspirational. The statements are aspirational. They're not statements of fact. They're not affirmations like I am safe or I am, right? No, they're aspirational. May I be, may I. So we're expressing kindness and benevolence toward our own being, which is the opposite of beating ourselves up, which many of us have been conditioned into doing and feeling bad about ourselves. And so this is beginning to shift that internal landscape to be one that's more benevolent. So they can pick whatever statements work for them.
Thank you, Fleet.
Yeah. All right. Well, good to see everyone. Good to see you, Carolina, in Czech Republic, and those folks that are on by phone or don't have your videos available, Diana and Isalis and Nicole's, and everyone. Great to be here with all of you today. And thank you so much for coming and for being part of our Zen Peacemaker family and community. And yeah, the Zen Peacemakers is an amazing movement, and we have this. I'll tell you, there's a lot of activism and social justice work in the world of all kinds. And, bless their hearts for their good motivations. But without the understanding and the wisdom of the three tenets, I think it often ends up being more polarization and, more win a battle, lose the war, because it just goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. In my own country, in the U.S., we're seeing a big back right now, with what's going on with Trump. But in a lot of ways, that got elected because of a big reaction to things going the other way, right? So, having this bigger perspective of the three tenets, I think, is absolutely essential to any possibility that over time we're actually going to develop a saner, healthier, more compassionate global society. So, thank goodness for the Zen Peacemakers.
Hey, thank you, Fleet. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. And keep practicing, keep going forward. And hope to see you soon. There are a bunch of links in the chat. If you haven't seen them, I'll give you a moment so you can grab those. But thank you again, Fleet, and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Goodbye, everybody. Take good care. Thank you.